It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am not better than my father.
This isn't just the story of a prophet, it's the journey of a soul, crushed by loneliness, lifted by mercy. If you've ever felt broken or forgotten, if you've ever asked God, "Why me?" and heard only silence, then stay. Because this story was written for you. If it speaks to your heart, please consider liking, subscribing, or sharing it with someone walking through their own wilderness. Thank you for being here. May peace find you, even in the desert. Now, let us return to a time when Israel was sinking into darkness in the long shadow of King Solomon's death. It was a time of silence from heaven. Israel had grown fat on prosperity and forgetful of her covenant. Since the death of Solomon, the kingdom splintered like cracked stone. Idolatry flowed like a river from throne to altar, and the name of Yahweh, once spoken with reverence, now lay buried under dust and indifference. Ahab reigned in Samaria, and with him Jezebel. Her beauty cloaked cruelty, her charm concealed venom. She imported the gods of her homeland Baal and Asherah, and raised temples to mock the Holy One of Israel. She seduced a nation to bow before carved wood, and no voice dared rise in protest. But heaven was not blind, nor had it forgotten. Far east across the rugged hills of Gilead, a solitary figure emerged. Cloaked in rough camel hair, face weathered by wind and fasting eyes burning with something not of this world. His name was Elijah. My God is Yahweh. No one summoned him. No priest anointed him. Yet he carried the weight of divine wrath. He did not walk. He advanced like a storm gathering over dry land. Straight into Samaria he came. No escort, no proclamation. Through palace courtyards and marble halls he strode untouched by guards too stunned to stop him. Even the air seemed to part before him. And there sat Ahab, in robes of luxury ringed with idols and counsel. Elijah stood alone. No sword at his side, no scroll in hand, only words etched in fire. As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives whom I serve, there shall be neither dew nor rain in these years except by my word. The silence that followed was not of confusion, it was judgment. Before anyone could reply, the prophet turned and vanished as swiftly as he came. No echo followed him, only fear, and the heavens began to close. Clouds that had once danced above the harvest fields faded. The dew that had kissed the vines each morning ceased. A heat like unseen judgment spread across the skies. Winds grew still, the air turned heavy, and the land began to thirst. Days passed, then weeks, no rain. Ahab's palace trembled with unrest, but Elijah could not be found. He had obeyed the voice. "Go eastward," the Lord had said, "and hide yourself by the brook Cherith. You shall drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there." And so the prophet disappeared not into safety, but into exile. The drought was not only punishment, it was a mirror. And the mirror showed a people dry of faith, scorched by idols, and cracked with longing for things that could never satisfy. Elijah, the man of flame, now waited by a dwindling stream, while a nation began to wither. Elijah departed as he had come, without a word, without farewell. His feet carried him eastward, away from Samaria's corrupted heart, into the wilderness by the brook Cherith. There, hidden among dry hills and wind-scarred stones, the prophet waited. He drank from the narrow stream, its waters cold and pure. And each morning at the break of dawn came a miracle. Wings beat against the silence of the sky. Black feathers sliced through the wind as ravens came bearing food, bread, and meat in their beaks. They did not cry, did not call, did not linger. They placed their gifts before him and vanished. Unclean birds, despised by men, chosen by God. Elijah sat beneath a brittle fig tree day after day, watching the shadows crawl across the rocks, watching the sky deepen from gold to flame to ash. He spoke no word aloud, he heard no laughter, he lived among the stones. Weeks melted into months. The brook whispered still but fainter, weaker. Its song, once crisp and clear, now trembled into silence. The drought, the very judgment Elijah had announced, was reaching even him. He bent to drink and found only dampness between stones. The brook had dried, and yet he did not waver. No panic, no despair, only silence. Faith without noise. Then at last God spoke again. His voice, not thunder, not flame, but stillness in the soul. Eyes. Go to Zarephath in Sidon. There a widow will care for you. Zarephath, Jezebel's homeland, the seat of Baal worship, the land of his enemies. Still Elijah wrapped his cloak around his shoulders and walked. The journey was long. The sun hammered the land. Cracked earth whispered beneath his feet. Fields lay barren. Trees gray as bone. Crows circled above, searching for carrion. No laughter, no voices. Only wind, only heat. And at last he saw her. A woman bent and weary, stooping to gather sticks. Her hands were cracked, her eyes hollowed by grief. Her back curled under weight, both physical and unseen. Elijah approached slowly. His voice was gentle but firm. Please, bring me a little water in a jar that I may drink. She turned. She nodded. But as she walked, also, bring me a piece of bread. She froze. Her shoulders fell. And with a voice fragile as a dry leaf, she said, As surely as your God lives, I have no bread. Only a handful of flour, a little oil. I'm gathering sticks to make one final meal for me and my son. After that, we will die. Elijah stood still. He saw her emptiness not only in her jar, but in her heart. Then he spoke not as a beggar, but as a prophet. Do not be afraid. Go and do as you've said. But first, bake a small cake of bread for me. Then something for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord, the jar of flour will not be used up, nor the jug of oil run dry until the day the Lord sends rain upon the earth. She stared at him. Time paused. It was a moment suspended between despair and belief, between logic and obedience. She turned away. She walked back. She lit the fire. She poured out the last of the flour. She emptied the last drop of oil. And then, when she returned, the jar was not empty, nor was the jug. The flour remained, the oil stayed, the promise held. And day after day Elijah ate. She ate, her son ate. And though the land still lay in drought, though the skies withheld their tears, inside one house in the land of Baal, hope flickered quiet, small, but alive. And so it was. In a foreign land among strangers with no temple, no altar, no scrolls, Elijah saw the quiet mercy of God, not in fire, not in thunder, but in a jar that never emptied. And yet, even in the house of provision, grief would come knocking, for there are valleys deeper than drought, and sorrows sharper than hunger. The next chapter of Elijah's journey would not begin with prophecy, but with death. The days passed, and the jar did not empty. The oil did not cease. And for a time the widow's home became a quiet ark floating above the drought. The boy laughed again. His ribs still showed, but his voice grew strong. And Elijah, the prophet of flame, sat in silence at the edge of the room listening. Not to visions, not to thunder, but to the breath of life. Then one morning the laughter stopped. The boy grew still, his skin pale, his breath vanished. No cry, no sound, only stillness. The widow's hands shook as she reached for him. She called his name. Once, twice, again. But he did not move. She turned to Elijah. Her eyes burned not with fire, but with the ache of betrayal. Her voice, when it came, was raw and broken. Have you come to remind me of my sin, to kill my son? Elijah did not answer. His lips trembled, but no words came. He rose gently, lifted the lifeless boy in his arms, and carried him upstairs to the upper room where he had prayed, where the oil had never failed. He laid the child upon his own bed. Then he fell beside him, and he cried out to the Lord, "O Lord, my God, have you brought tragedy also upon this widow with whom I stay by causing her son to die?" No answer, only silence. Then Elijah stretched himself out over the child body upon the body and cried again, "O Lord, my God, let this child's life return to him." Nothing. A second time he stretched himself, arms open, face pressed to still skin. Let his life return to him. Still the heavens remained closed. A third time, with every breath left in him, he cried out, "Lord, let the soul return to this child." And then the boy breathed. Once, twice. His chest rose, his mouth gasped, his eyes opened. And Elijah wept, not with power, not with pride, but with awe. He carried the boy down the stairs, each step slower than the last. The woman stood, hands clenched, jaw tight. Elijah did not speak. He simply placed the living child into her arms. And then she said, not with doubt, not with bitterness, but with a trembling reverence, "Now I know you are a man of God, and the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth." And in that small room, far from any temple, life returned, not just to the boy, but to faith. And then 3 years passed. No voice, no cloud, no mercy. The sun scorched the land until the very rocks cracked. Children cried without tears. Wells turned to dust. The gods of Baal stood tall, yet gave nothing. And in the silence, men began to wonder, had Yahweh forgotten? But then the voice returned, "Go, show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth." Elijah rose, not from glory, not from strength, but from obedience. As he walked, the dry wind whispered through the hills. His cloak fluttered behind him like smoke from a dying fire. And ahead of him rode Obadiah, a man of God, hidden in plain sight. He served in Ahab's palace, but feared the Lord. In secret he had hidden prophets, 50 in one cave, 50 in another, feeding them bread and water, while Jezebel hunted their blood. Now he was searching for grass to keep the royal horses alive. Then he saw Elijah, and his heart froze. "Is it really you, my lord Elijah?" Elijah nodded. "Go, tell your master Elijah is here." But Obadiah trembled. "What have I done, that you hand me over to Ahab to be killed? If I go and you vanish again, as the Spirit has taken you, before he will kill me. I have feared the Lord since my youth. Did you not hear I hid the prophets when Jezebel raged? I fed them, I saved them." Elijah looked at him not with anger, but with gravity. "As the Lord of hosts lives whom I serve, I will show myself to Ahab today." And so Obadiah went. The sun stood high as Elijah approached the throne of Samaria once more. And there stood Ahab, 3 years older, 3 years thirstier, 3 years more bitter. He looked at the prophet and spat the first word like venom. "Is that you, O troubler of Israel?" But Elijah did not flinch. "I have not troubled Israel," he replied. "But you and your father's house. You have abandoned the commands of the Lord and followed the Baals. Now then, summon all Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel. Bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. Let the people come. Let the gods answer." And with that, the line was drawn. They gathered at dawn. All Israel, from farmers and merchants to priests and soldiers, climbed the slopes of Mount Carmel. Above them, clouds still refused to form. The wind was dry, the sky silent. At the summit, 2 altars would soon stand. 2 sacrifices, 1 truth. Elijah stood alone. Across from him stood 450 prophets of Baal robed in crimson, their chants already stirring the dust. Another 400 prophets of Asherah stood nearby, guarded by the queen's men, eyes gleaming with scorn. Elijah raised his voice. How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal is God, follow him. But the people said, nothing. No cry, no whisper, only the rustle of dry cloaks in the wind. So Elijah spoke again. I alone am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are many. Let 2 bulls be given to us. Let them choose one, cut it in pieces and lay it on wood, but put no fire to it. I will prepare the other and lay it on wood, but put no fire to it. Then you call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire, he is God. And all the people said, it is well spoken. So the prophets of Baal stepped forward. They chose their bull cut. It laid it on the altar. From morning till noon they cried aloud, O Baal, answer us. They danced, they leapt, they spun in frenzy around the stones. But there was no voice, no answer, no fire. At noon Elijah stepped forward. His voice rang with a sharp edge. Cry louder. He is a god, isn't he? Perhaps he is meditating, or busy, or on a journey. Maybe he is asleep and must be awakened. The prophets of Baal grew frantic. They cried louder. They slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed like water around the altar. The sun climbed higher. Their voices cracked, their limbs weakened. They staggered, bloodied, exhausted horse. But still, no voice, no fire, no God, only silence. The kind that humbles nations, the kind that breaks altars built on lies. And the people watched, not with joy, not with hate, but with a quiet terror, as if their idols had turned to dust before their eyes. The time of the evening sacrifice was near, and Elijah still stood. Then Elijah said to the people, Come near to me. And they came, silent, wounded by the emptiness they had just witnessed, ashamed of their long silence, but drawn by something they could not name. There, beside the ruined altar of Yahweh, Elijah knelt. Stone by stone, he rebuilt what had been broken. 12 stones, 1 for each tribe of Israel, each name engraved not in letters, but in memory. Though the kingdom was divided, the altar stood whole. Then he dug a trench around it wide enough to hold gallons of water. He laid wood atop the stones. He cut the bull and arranged the pieces. Then he said, Fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the offering and the wood. They obeyed. Water soaked the wood, darkened the stones. Do it again, he said. They poured again. Do it a 3rd time. And they did. Water flowed around the altar, filled the trench, drenched every part. There would be no mistake, no illusion, no trick. This fire, if it came, would be from heaven. Then Elijah stepped forward. No dancing, no shouting, no blood. Only a voice. Steady, reverent, sure. O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord. Answer me, that this people may know you and turn their hearts back. And then it came. Not wind, not thunder, not rain, but fire. It fell like a sword from the heavens, blazing pure, all-consuming. It devoured the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the water, even the dust beneath the altar. It left nothing but holy silence. And the people fell, faces to the ground, mouths to the dust, hands trembling, and they cried out again and again, Yahweh, He is God. Yahweh, He is God. The mountain echoed. Their cries shook the valley below. Then Elijah stood, his voice no longer soft, but thunder in human form. Seize the prophets of Baal. Let not one escape. And they seized them, dragged them down to the brook Kishon, where the drought had left only mud and bone. And there the prophets of Baal fell, one, by sword and stone. Their blood washed away the lies they told. And for the first time in years, Israel remembered. Not the power of Baal, but the fire of Yahweh. Rain had not touched Israel for over 3 years. But now the fire had fallen. The prophets of Baal were gone. And Elijah stood again on the heights of Carmel. The people had descended. The mountain once crowded was now silent. But Elijah remained. He climbed to the summit, bowed down to the earth, and placed his face between his knees. Then he said to his servant, "Go up, now look toward the sea." The servant obeyed. He scanned the horizon, nothing. "No sign, my lord, only sky." Elijah said nothing. He prayed again, then again, and again. 7 times he sent the servant. 7 times he waited in silence, until the 7th. And the servant cried out, "There is a cloud small as a man's hand rising from the sea." Elijah stood. "Go, say to Ahab, harness your chariot and go down, lest the rain stop you." And even as the words left his mouth, the wind rose. Cool, swift, alive. Clouds gathered, darkened, rumbled, and then rain. It came like grace fast, wild cleansing. The earth drank deep, the dust surrendered. And Elijah ran, not with human strength, not with weary legs, but with the hand of the Lord upon him. He outran Ahab's chariot all the way to Jezreel. From fire to rain, from mountain to city, Elijah had witnessed the triumph of God. But the morning came, and with it a message. From Jezebel, a whisper carried by a breathless messenger. "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." 1 sentence, and the prophet broke. Elijah, who had faced armies, who had silenced a nation, who had called fire from heaven, now fled. Not to battle, not to hide, but to escape his own soul. He ran into the wilderness. No cloak of thunder, no voice from heaven. Only dust beneath his feet and despair within his chest. And under the shade of a solitary broom tree, he collapsed. And he whispered, "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers." The prophet of flame had become a man of ashes, and he lay beneath the broom tree, waiting to die. The sky above offered no answers. The wind carried no voice. Even silence had turned its face away. Then a touch, not of thunder, not of fire, but a hand gentle, steady. "Arise and eat," the angel said. And there beside him a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. Elijah ate, but then lay down again. The weight of living was heavier than hunger. A second time the angel touched him. "Arise and eat," he said again, "for the journey is too great for you." Elijah rose, he ate, he drank, and with that food he walked 40 days, 40 nights, across wilderness, through shadows, beyond the reach of men, until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he found a cave, a place to hide, a place to rest, a place to disappear. But the voice came, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And the prophet answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, but the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek to take my life." Then the voice said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord." So he did. And a wind tore through the mountains, a roar that shattered stone-splitting cliffs, rattling the cave. But the Lord was not in the wind. Then came an earthquake. The ground buckled beneath him. Rocks screamed. The sky swayed. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. Then fire flames licked the air. The scent of judgment and fear filled his nostrils. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound. Not thunder, not a cry. A whisper. A still, small voice. And Elijah wrapped his face in his cloak. He stepped to the mouth of the cave. And again the voice asked, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And again he answered, "I am alone. I have tried. They have all turned away." And though the heavens did not shake, though no fire fell from above, God spoke, "You are not alone. 7,000 in Israel have not bowed to Baal. I have kept them, and I will send you back, not to die, but to anoint kings, to raise up a prophet after you. You are not the end. You are a beginning." And in the silence that followed, Elijah listened and believed. From the sacred silence of Horeb, Elijah came down. But he did not come alone. He carried with him new names spoken by the whisper of God: Hazael, Jehu, and one unknown to the world but not to heaven, Elisha, son of Shaphat. And so Elijah walked. Through wind-swept ridges and barren paths, his cloak wrapped tight around him, until at last he saw him. A man in the field, not robed like a priest, not armored like a warrior, but bent beneath the yoke of oxen. Hands calloused, brow furrowed under the heat. Elisha plowed the earth, guiding 12 pairs of ox in his life measured by furrows and season. Elijah did not speak. He simply stepped forward, removed his own cloak, and laid it upon the young man's shoulders. No words, just the weight of something divine now resting on his back. And Elisha stopped. He stood there frozen, his breath caught in his chest. This was no ordinary garment. It was a mantle, the very sign of God's appointment. A calling not offered, it was declared. Elisha ran after the prophet, his voice trembling. "Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, and then I will follow you." Elijah turned slightly, but his eyes remained fixed ahead. "Go back then," he said, "but remember what I've just done to you." There was no pressure, no compulsion, only the echo of destiny and a man's choice. And Elisha chose. He returned, not to linger, but to leave. He took the oxen, the very beasts of his livelihood, and slaughtered them. Then he took the wooden plow, the symbol of his past, and set it ablaze. On that fire, he cooked the meat and offered it to the people. An altar made from toil, a sacrifice of everything once known. No backup, no retreat. And when the smoke lifted, Elisha walked away, not as a farmer, but as a servant of the Most High. He followed Elijah step by step, not knowing where the road would lead, only that the one who called had already gone ahead. They walked in silence, side by side, two men bound by more than mentorship, bound by the mystery of calling. From Gilgal to Bethel, from Bethel to Jericho, and now to the Jordan. At every stop, Elijah tested his companion's resolve. "Stay here," Elijah said gently at Gilgal, "for the Lord has sent me on to Bethel." But Elisha's eyes did not flinch. "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." And so they walked. At Bethel, the sons of the prophets emerged quietly from their dwellings. One whispered to Elisha, "Do you know the Lord will take your master from you today?" "I know," he replied, his voice low and firm. "Be silent." The same exchange happened again at Jericho. Each step was a farewell unspoken, a chapter nearing its final line. But Elijah would not speak of endings. He only walked forward. When they arrived at the banks of the Jordan, the water ran strong, wide, deep, uncrossable. But Elijah took his cloak, rolled it tightly, and struck the surface. The river recoiled. Its currents withdrew to the left and the right, opening a path of dry earth between. Together they crossed. On the far side, Elijah stopped. The wind brushed through his beard like a final breath. Then he turned. "Tell me," he said to Elisha, "what may I do for you before I am taken away?" Elisha did not hesitate. "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." The old prophet studied him. This was not a question of ambition. It was the cry of a heart willing to carry a weight twice as heavy to burn with the same divine fire and more. "You have asked for a hard thing," Elijah said. "Yet, if you see me when I am taken from you, it shall be so." They resumed their walk. The sky was quiet. No sound but the rustle of wind through dry grass. Then suddenly, without warning, the silence was split. A whirlwind surged from the heavens, violent and glorious. The earth trembled beneath their feet. Fire ignited the sky. From the swirling storm descended a chariot of fire pulled by horses of flame. It blazed through the veil between heaven and earth. Elisha gasped. The chariot raced between them, separating master from disciple. Elijah's body was caught in the whirlwind, lifted like a flame ascending into glory. His figure blurred in the light robes dancing in the storm as he rose upward higher and higher beyond the reach of man. "My father! My father!" Elisha cried out, his voice breaking. The chariots of Israel and its horsemen. But Elijah was gone. Only silence remained, and the soft flutter of something falling. Elisha looked down. There, resting at his feet, lay Elijah's cloak. The same cloak that parted the Jordan. The same cloak that once wrapped a trembling prophet upon Mount Horeb. Now it lay still, waiting. Elisha picked it up with both hands. The fabric still carried the scent of the wind, the dust of many roads, the fire of heaven's touch. With trembling fingers, he draped it across his shoulders. The old had passed. The mantle had been given, and the spirit of Elijah now rested upon Elisha. Elisha stood alone at the edge of the Jordan. The wind had settled, the fire had passed, and the heavens were silent. In his hands, the cloak of Elijah. In his heart, the weight of a calling. He rolled the cloak tightly, just as his master had done. He struck the water. "Where now is the Lord? The God of Elijah," he cried. The river listened, and then it parted. Left and right, the waters withdrew, leaving a dry path once more. From the hills, the sons of the prophets watched. They had followed from a distance, unsure, uncertain. But now they bowed. "The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha," they said, and they came to meet him and bowed to the ground before him. Still old habits die hard. "Let us send 50 strong men," they urged, "to search for your master. Perhaps the Spirit of the Lord has taken him up and cast him upon some mountain or into some valley." Elisha sighed. "There is no need," he said. But they insisted. Again and again until he relented. "Send them." And they searched 3 days, but found nothing. Elijah was gone, not lost, but lifted. Elisha then traveled to Jericho. The city welcomed him, but its people were troubled. "Our water is bad," they told him, "and the land barren." He asked for a new bowl, filled it with salt. Then he walked to the spring, the heart of the city's water. He poured the salt into its depths and spoke, "Thus says the Lord, I have healed this water. Never again shall death or barrenness come from it." And the waters were healed. The land was made whole. No fire fell, no whirlwind came, only salt and a word. But in that moment, new life began. And Elisha the servant, once cloaked in another's shadow, now walked in the fullness of his own calling. From Jericho, Elisha continued his sacred journey northward toward the hills of Bethel. This was no ordinary route, and Bethel was no ordinary place. Once a sacred site where Jacob dreamed of heaven's ladder. Now it had become a corrupted shrine, a center of idolatry, where golden calves were worshipped under the name of Yahweh. And as Elisha climbed that ancient path, dust gathering upon his cloak and wind tangling his hair, a crowd began to gather in the distance. They weren't elders. They weren't priests. They were youths, many of them likely raised in a culture of mockery, shaped by a generation that had forgotten reverence. From the outskirts of the city, they surged forward, not with honor, but with contempt. "Go on up, you bald head," they jeered. "Go up, just like Elijah did." But this was not mere schoolboy taunting. Their words cut deeper than insults. They were arrows launched at the very soul of the prophetic office. "Go up," they said, as if to mock the sacred ascension of Elijah. As if to say, "Disappear, vanish, we don't want you here." Their laughter echoed loud and cruel beneath the ruined altars of Bethel. And Baldhead, it was not just about his appearance. It was a calculated humiliation, an attempt to strip away dignity, to reduce the anointed servant of God to a figure of ridicule. Elisha stopped. He did not run. He did not argue. He turned and looked upon them, not with human anger, but with holy sorrow. He knew the weight of this moment. For mocking a prophet was not just mocking a man, it was despising the voice of God. And so, in the name of the Lord, he pronounced judgment. No sword was drawn, no hand was raised. But suddenly, from the nearby woods, 2 female bears emerged, massive, wild, terrible in strength. They didn't growl, they didn't hesitate. They moved with divine intent. And in moments, 42 of those mockers were struck down not by Elisha's hand, but by nature itself, summoned in obedience to God's justice. A silence fell over the hillside. The laughter was gone. The mocking vanished like smoke. There was only dust and blood and a prophet who did not speak. Elisha did not celebrate. He did not weep. He simply turned, pulled his cloak around his shoulders, and walked on, eyes forward, spirit resolved. Because the path of the prophet is not made of applause or comfort. It is carved through rejection, fire, and reverence. And from that day forward, all who heard what happened in Bethel knew. The spirit that once blazed in Elijah now burned in Elisha. And the voice of Yahweh would not be mocked. The dawn broke softly over Dothan. Fields shimmered with dew. Bird song drifted on the breeze. But the servant's breath caught in his throat. From the city walls he saw them, an army of horses and chariots, soldiers from Aram encircling the valley. His heart pounded. He ran to Elisha. "Alas, my master, what shall we do?" But Elisha's eyes were calm. "Do not be afraid," he said, "for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." The servant blinked. He saw nothing but spears and war. No allies, no hope. Then Elisha prayed, "O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see." And the veil lifted. The servant gasped. The hills around them, once plain and green, were now ablaze with fire. Chariots of flame, horses of light, a host not of men, but of heaven. They surrounded Elisha like a crown of glory. Fiery sentinels, silent and mighty. No sword was drawn, yet no force could stand against them. The servant fell to his knees. He had feared the visible, but now trembled at the unseen. Then Elisha looked down at the enemy ranks. The army of Aram advanced, unaware of what watched from above. Elisha prayed again, "Strike this people with blindness, O Lord." And suddenly the soldiers stopped. Confusion swept through them. They stumbled, disoriented, unable to see. Elisha walked out to them, one man among thousands. "This is not the way," he said, "nor is this the city. Follow me, and I will bring you to the man you seek." And the army obeyed. Like children led by hand, they followed the very man they came to capture. Elisha led them to Samaria, right into the heart of Israel's capital. Then he prayed once more, "O Lord, open the eyes of these men that they may see." And they saw. Soldiers of Aram surrounded by Israel's army. The hunters had become the hunted. Panic surged. But before swords could clash, the king of Israel turned to Elisha. "My father," he asked, "shall I strike them down?" But Elisha said, "No. Would you strike down those whom you have taken captive with sword and bow? Set bread and water before them that they may eat and drink and go to their master." And so a feast was prepared. Bread was broken, jugs of water poured. And the enemies of Israel, blinded, led, and now spared, ate at the table of the prophet. Then they returned to Aram, and the armies came no more, not because of conquest, but because of mercy. Elisha had not won with blades, but with vision, with prayer, with grace. And the hills of Dothan remembered the fire that did not burn flesh, the chariots that did not charge, and the prophet who fought without lifting a hand. Years had passed since the day Elisha received Elijah's mantle, since he watched his master ascend in fire and struck the waters with trembling hands. Years of miracles, of counsel to kings, of standing alone when others bowed. But now the prophet himself was old, frail in body, though his spirit still burned. Elisha lay on his bed, breath, shallow eyes fixed on something distant. Not the ceiling, but perhaps a vision. Something beyond the room's dim walls. His servants moved gently about him, whispering with care. Israel's greatest prophet was dying. He spoke no final sermons, no grand farewell, only silence and waiting. Then one day his spirit slipped quietly from his body. The man who had once parted waters, healed lepers, raised the dead, now lay still. His body was placed in a tomb cut into the rock. The desert wind carried no song, just dust and memory. Time passed. Seasons changed. The land was restless. Moabite raiders crossed the border in violent waves, seizing harvests and scattering villages. One morning, as a group of men prepared to bury a friend, they heard the hoofbeats of raiders echoing through the hills. Panic swept over them. There was no time for ceremony, no time for mourning. In desperation, they spotted a tomb nearby. Without realizing whose it was, they carried the corpse swiftly through the stone entrance and laid him down beside the bones of Elisha. Then, something unexplainable happened. The moment the dead man's body touched the bones of the prophet, he stirred. Breath rushed into lungs that had ceased. Fingers twitched, eyes opened wide. The man sat up. He looked at the stunned faces surrounding him, their grief now twisted into wonder. He stood, alive. No thunder shook the sky. No fire fell from heaven. Just the silent echo of a miracle, issued not from lips but from the remnants of a prophet's body. Elisha was gone. Yet his God had not departed. Even in death, the Lord spoke. This was the prophet's final miracle. A resurrection without warning. A rebuke to despair. A whisper from beyond the grave that life still had the final word. Elisha's legacy did not end in the tomb. Because his God, the same God who took Elijah in fire and raised a boy through prayer and breathed life into dry bones, still moved, still answered, and still reached down even into the grave to bring the dead back to life. For those who had ears to hear, this was not the end, only a beginning. Naaman was a man of victories, a commander of armies, feared by nations, favored by his king. But all his titles could not hide the white spots that spread across his skin. Leprosy, incurable, isolating, a slow unraveling of flesh and pride. But in his house, a girl, just a girl, a slave from Israel, taken during war, spoke a word that pierced through despair. If only my master could see the prophet in Samaria, he would be healed. Hope born not from power, but from the lips of a captive. Naaman went, letters in hand, gifts in abundance, silver, gold, garments of fine linen. He stood before the house of Elisha and waited, but the prophet did not come. Instead, a servant appeared with a message. Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River, and your flesh will be restored. Naaman froze, anger flared. What? He doesn't even come out to see me, doesn't wave his hand, doesn't call on his God. Are not the rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel? He turned away, offended, wounded in pride more than skin. But his own servants, brave and gentle, spoke. My father, they said if the prophet had asked you to do something great, would you not have done it? How much more then when he says wash and be clean? Naaman paused. Then he went down to the Jordan. One step, then another. He entered the murky waters, foreign, humbling. He dipped once. Nothing. Twice the spots still clung. 3, 4, 5. His fists clenched, his heart pounded. 6, and then the 7th. He rose, and the disease was gone. His flesh was like the flesh of a child, smooth, alive, whole. Naaman gasped, not because he was healed, but because he had encountered something no sword could win: grace. He returned to Elisha, this time not in pride, but in awe. Now I know, he said, that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. He offered gifts Elisha refused. Naaman pressed. Still, the prophet would not take silver or gold, because healing was not for sale, and God's mercy is free. Then Naaman made a request. Please let me take 2 mule loads of earth, so that I may worship the Lord on Israel's soil, though I must return to a land of idols. And Elisha said, Go in peace. One man, a foreigner, once a leper, now a believer, had touched the mercy of the living God. Not in palaces, not in rivers of renown, but in the muddy waters of Jordan, and in the stillness of obedience. But not all hearts walk the same path. Ghazi, the servant of Elisha, had watched the miracle. He had seen Naaman's leprosy vanish like mist before the morning sun. He had heard the prophet refuse silver, gold, and garments, and in that refusal, he saw opportunity. As Naaman departed, joy renewed Ghazi's heart, burned, but not with wonder, with want. My master was too easy on this Aramean, he muttered. As surely as the Lord lives, I'll run after him and get something. He ran. Naaman, still traveling, saw the man approaching and stopped. Is everything all right? Yes, Ghazi said breathlessly. My master sent me. 2 young prophets just arrived from the hill country of Ephraim. Please, he asks for a talent of silver and 2 sets of clothes for them. Naaman's heart was still overflowing. By all means, take 2 talents, he said. He urged Ghazi to accept more, even sending servants to carry it all back. And Ghazi hid the treasures in a secret place. Then he returned calm and composed and stood before Elisha. Elisha looked at him. Where have you been, Ghazi? Your servant didn't go anywhere, he replied. But the eyes of the prophet did not blink. Was not my spirit with you when the man got down from his chariot to meet you? The silence grew heavy. It pressed like judgment. Is this the time to take silver, to accept clothes, olive groves, vineyards, flocks, herds, or servants? No, Ghazi, because you have done this, Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and to your descendants forever. And in that moment his skin began to pale, not with fear but with disease. White blotches surfaced, spreading like guilt unconfessed. Ghazi staggered back, his hands once clean, now blemished, his flesh marked with shame. He fled from Elisha's presence, but he could not outrun what he had become. He had traded purity for profit, presence for possessions, and now he bore in his body the weight of deceit. Not just for a moment, not just for a season, but for generations. The same mercy that had embraced Naaman now stood as witness against Ghazi. Because the miracle was never about water or rivers. It was about obedience, about truth. And where truth is betrayed, judgment follows. The prophet said nothing more. He did not weep, he did not rage, because justice had spoken, and its sentence was white as snow. The city was sealed. Samaria, proud and walled, now lay silent under siege. The army of Aram encircled its gates. Food was gone. Hope evaporated. Mothers whispered horrors. Children wailed without tears. In hidden corners, deals were struck over flesh. Famine had turned them into ghosts, the living envying the dead. Inside the palace, a king tore his robes and blamed the prophet. But Elisha spoke. By this time tomorrow, a measure of fine flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. A captain beside him laughed. Even if the Lord opened the windows of heaven, could this be? Elisha's gaze did not flinch. You will see it with your own eyes, but you will not eat of it. Beyond the walls outside the city's edge, 4 lepers sat by the gate. They were outcasts, untouched by famine, not because they had food, but because no one dared come near. One looked at the others. Why stay here until we die? If we enter the city, we die with them. If we sit here, we die. Let's go to the camp of the Arameans. If they spare us, we live. If they kill us, we die. And so they rose, 4 frail men, walking into an enemy camp. But the Lord had gone before them. He had caused the Arameans to hear a sound of phantom thunder. Horses, chariots, armies. They thought Israel Ki. had hired allies. Terror gripped them. They fled in the night, left to tents gold weapons, even food still warm on the fire. When the lepers arrived, no guards, no arrows, only silence and abundance. They ate, they drank, they gathered silver and garments. They ran to hide their treasures. But then one of them stopped. "What we're doing is not right. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping silent. If we wait until morning, punishment will overtake us. Let us go and tell." They returned, stumbling into the city, voices, hoarse eyes wide. The gatekeeper ran to the palace. Word spread like flame. The king, suspicious, sent scouts. They followed the trail of garments, supplies, and footprints. No enemy, only escape. And then the people surged. They stormed the gate, trampled one another to reach the abandoned camp. The captain who had mocked the prophet stood at the gate, trying to maintain order. But the crowd was wild, starved, desperate. They crushed him beneath their feet. And so, he saw the flour, he saw the barley, he saw the promise fulfilled. But he did not eat. Just as Elisha had said, 7 years had passed. The woman of Shunem, the one whose barren womb had opened, the one whose dead son had breathed again, had left her homeland, as Elisha had warned. "There will be a famine in the land for 7 years," he said. And so she and her household departed, to foreign soil, to unknown places, but with faith still tethered to the prophet's word. Now, she returned, but time does not wait. While she was gone, others had claimed her house, her land, her harvests. She came home to emptiness, to loss. So she did what few dared. She went to the king. At that very moment, the king of Israel sat listening to Ghazi. The servant once afflicted, now summoned to recount the wonders of Elisha. Ghazi, animated, spoke of dead boys, rising of oil, multiplying of words that pierced famine. And there was, he said, this woman from Shunem, whose son died but lived again when the prophet prayed over him. And as he spoke, she entered. The king turned. "Is this?" Ghazi's voice faltered. "My lord, O king, this is the woman, and this is her son." The boy stood beside her, now older but alive. The king leaned forward. "Tell me," he said, "is it true?" And the woman recounted her story, not with drama, but with quiet conviction. The prophet's visit, the promised child, the sudden death, the stairway prayer, the breath returned, the exile, the return, and the loss of all. The king's eyes narrowed, not in doubt, but in decision. "Restore all that was hers," he said, "and all the income from her land, from the day she left until now." And just like that, what was lost was returned. Not only fields and stones, but years. Years of toil, of crops she never gathered, of fruit she never tasted. The famine had taken much, but the God of Elisha had preserved what mattered. Justice had not forgotten her name, and mercy had remembered her address. The woman left the palace not with an army, but with restoration, because God's timing is perfect. Even after 7 silent years, he still speaks through kings, through memory, through doors that open just as you step through them. Elisha lay dying. The man who had parted waters, called down fire, healed the sick and raised the dead, now rested on a simple bed, his breath shallow, his eyes dim. But word of his illness spread, and Joash, king of Israel, came down to him, a king, weeping before a prophet. My father, he cried, the chariots of Israel and their horsemen." It was the same cry Elisha himself had once shouted when Elijah was taken from him. Now the torch would dim again. But Elisha was not finished. "Take a bow and arrows," he said. The king obeyed. Elisha placed his frail hands over Joash's strong ones, guiding the bowstring. The touch of a prophet, the weight of generation. "Open the east window," he said, "and shoot." The arrow flew, cutting through still air, piercing more than distance. The arrow of the Lord's victory. Elisha declared the arrow of victory over Aram. "You shall strike them at Aphek until they are destroyed." Hope stirred in the king's chest. Now Elisha said, "Take the arrows and strike the ground." Joash took them. He struck once, then again, then a third time, and stopped. Elisha's eyes flared. Even on his deathbed, fire remained. "You should have struck 5 or 6 times, then you would have struck Aram down completely. But now you will strike them only 3 times." A silence fell, not of peace but of missed promise. Joash bowed his head. Elisha leaned back, his strength ebbing. He had delivered his final word, not of healing, not of judgment, but of partial victory, a warning sealed in hesitation. And then he breathed his last. No whirlwind, no chariots of fire, just a prophet, returning to dust. The man who had once watched his master vanish into heaven now descended into earth. But his words remained, and even in death, his spirit had one more miracle to speak. Elisha's journey was never about spectacle. Though fire had fallen, though rivers had parted, though oil had flowed without end, his path was not paved with glory, but with grace. He had picked up Elijah's mantle not for fame, but for faithfulness. He stood before kings, but also sat with widows. He spoke to armies and to grieving mothers. He healed generals and raised children from death. He fed multitudes with little and saw the invisible. He blinded the eyes of soldiers and opened the eyes of servants. He was a prophet of reversals, of quiet strength, of divine mercy. And when he died, there was no chariot, no whirlwind, just bones, laid in a tomb, dust returning to dust. But even bones can speak. One day a dead man was thrown hurriedly into Elisha's grave. His lifeless form touched the prophet's bones, and breath returned, not through a prayer, not by a command, but by presence. The grave, once a seal, became a doorway. And in that silence, the final miracle whispered, "Death does not win." Elisha never returned from heaven, never ascended, never walked again on earth. But his legacy pointed forward to a greater prophet, a greater healing, a greater resurrection. Where Elisha healed through touch, Christ healed by word. Where Elisha raised one boy, Christ called many from tombs. Where Elisha died and another lived by contact, Christ died and all who believe live by faith. Elisha's final miracle was without voice, but it shouted eternity. In the bones of a dead prophet, life stirred, hope ignited. Darkness trembled. And so we are left with this: if life could rise from bones, what might rise from your brokenness? If grace met a corpse in a cave, can it not meet you in your silence? The story is told. The bones have spoken. What will you do with their echo? If this journey stirred something within you, if the voice of the prophet echoed in your soul, then don't walk away in silence. Subscribe to stay near the stories that breathe. Leave a like if this reminded you of grace. Share this with someone wandering their own wilderness. We are honored you walk this path with us. May you carry the mantle of hope into the quiet places of your life. Thank you for watching. May peace go with you, and may the God of Elisha speak softly to your heart until we meet again.